full client on-site tool, but I want the full client. Wow, it's pretty impressive that it can kind of hear me from that far. Yeah, I know. I'm like it can barely hear me. Indeed, obviously, yeah. He's here.
Um,
How you doing?
we need a bigger room for HTTP. Why does no one care about HTTP? How many people are in this room?
Maybe it's good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Quick question for you two. So,
Sure, sure.
as you might have seen in the news,
Yes.
I have this all hands. As soon as I need to be,
Well, it's already been released, you know.
I know.
Okay.
But as soon as it ends, I will rush back down here. So what
Okay.
I propose is
Sure.
bump me to the end of today,
Off you go.
and if I'm not here, say bump me to tomorrow.
Enjoy your all hands.
So many hands.
Sorry, folks. We'll get started in just a moment. Let's see. I can share the note well, I guess. Can I share screen? All right.
Have we recruited a note taker?
Not yet. We can do that.
All right. Hello, everyone. Before we start, one of the things we're going to need to do is get a note taker for today. Um, you will earn our undying appreciation if you take notes. And the link for that pad is in the agenda. Wow, that is very blurry. Um, oof, oof. All right. Anyone able to help take notes? Note poorly.
Hold on. It's not. It's not. It's not that. And that tool is WebRTC.
The chair slash. We don't have those.
We're not going to debug this problem in this working group.
All right. Note takers, anyone? All were noting well.
I think the loud one's over there. One of those.
Yeah. Well, David has this excuse of leaving. Lars, do you like taking notes? Ah.
Somebody grab his bag real quick. You don't have to. I chaired quick for how many years? Come on. It,
Will someone who is not leaving please help us take notes?
staying.
We got it. No answers. This bodes poorly, Mark.
Anybody? Well, we can't continue if we don't have minutes.
Martin?
Martin Siemens getting his laptop out.
Are you going to be able to help us? Nope. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We just need very brief summaries of what is discussed and what especially we decide, if indeed anything. So this is the Note Well. If you're not familiar with it, please become familiar with it. You can find it by searching on your favorite internet search engine for IETF Note Well. And it regards the terms under which we participate here regarding things like intellectual property, which is very important and you need to understand before you participate, as well as standards of behavior, which we do take seriously. So again, if you're not familiar with this, please do become familiar with it. And I'll just go to our agenda. Excuse me. So we have 2 sessions in this meeting. Today, we're going to go over 3 active drafts. I think we may not use 20 minutes on all of those. And then we have a presentation from David, if he's still here, on the wrap-up capsule. And then a presentation from Tommy about communicating proxy configuration and provisioning domains. Then on Wednesday, we have a couple of more active drafts. As you can tell, the number of active drafts we actually have to discuss is contracting, which I think is probably a good thing. I think we might have a slightly quieter period for a while. And we're going to talk about Novari search and revising cookies. I know I'm missing one thing from this because I believe we had a Braid presentation as well, didn't we? Yeah, so I'll get that on the agenda. Is Wednesday good for you? Awesome. Okay. And I think we still need slides from you, right? Okay. Yeah, so like I said, we're a little light on the agenda, so I don't expect we're going to use either of these 2-hour slots to their fullest, but we'll see how we go. Any agenda bashing? Okay, let's get started then. First up, we've got resumable uploads with Marius. Let me put this into the right mode. Thank you.
Marius would be able to share it.
Yeah, if you want to share your slides, Marius, remotely using the
share slides button.
Ask slides?
Yeah, so there's the share slides button with the little document, and you can ask for permission there.
This one?
Correct, and then you can select your deck.
Okay, perfect. Is the audio good this time? Not too loud?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the part about resumable uploads. Just a brief reminder, with resumable uploads, we try to make uploads more useful and more resilient by allowing the client to recover from unintended interruptions by querying how much data the server already received, and then it can just resume the upload from the point of interruption without having to retransmit all of the data again. Before the IETF meeting, we published the draft iteration 4. It included a few noteworthy changes, which are we now have the application/partial upload media type for batch requests. We have also introduced upload limits, which is a method for the server to announce upload-related limits to the client. This currently includes a maximum or minimum size for entire upload, as well as a maximum or minimum size for an individual request, which is especially helpful if you have proxies that limit request sizes. Another limit is also upload expiration. I will be getting back to that in a later slide. We have also added guidelines for handling content and transfer codings, as well as guidelines for using digest fields for integrity checks. In addition to that, we also have added problem types for common error responses. All in all, the draft is shaping up pretty well, but there's still a few questions that remain open and that we would like input on. This brings me to the first point regarding upload limits. So as a general reminder, when the server creates a new upload resource, the server can indicate limits in the response. It is done so using the upload limit header, which you can see in the example below. Here the client sends a post request to /upload requesting a new upload resource, and the server accepts this resource and says 201 created at this location is the new upload resource, but with those limits. In this case, it has a maximum upload size of 1 GB, as well as a minimum request size of 5 MB. Now this is handy, the client now knows the limits, but it only knows those limits once it has created the upload resource. So it doesn't know them upfront. Meaning if the client wants to upload a 2 GB file, it would now discover that it actually cannot perform the entire transaction because the server wouldn't accept the entire file in the end, which isn't great. So we've been thinking about allowing the client to discover the upload limits upfront. This is an entire optional mechanism. This is not mandatory, but if the client wants to, it could send an options request upfront. So we can see here in the example, it sends an option request to /upload, and then the server responds with the upload limits. Again, a maximum request size or no, a maximum upload size of 1 GB, as well as a minimum append size of 5 MB. And especially this minimum request size is pretty handy to know for the client so it can properly split the upload into multiple requests if this is required by some proxy or some intermediary. In addition, now this is a big if. There haven't been any talks about this in that direction yet, but if at some point resumable uploads would get implemented in browsers, we could piggyback on the options requests that are already sent for cross-origin resource sharing pre-flight requests. And the server automatically knows the limits and could apply them accordingly. But yeah, of course, this is only a proposal. And this is the first question, if there's any input on this, if this is a thing that is rather not liked in the design of HTTP or not. So if there's any input on that.
Thanks. Hey, Marcus. I'm curious, would this, so I think the idea here with at least with the append size, you're saying that maybe a proxy wouldn't allow a chunk of that size going through. If this header would be set by this origin server, who would be responsible for it?
In my experience, it happens quite often that the server operator has a proxy on their side, and they have a limit on the maximum size of the what can go through the proxy. So they would be setting this header, yes.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Okay, but if there's nothing else, then I might continue.
Julian had a question in chat.
Oh, thank you. Do new request header fields work with options for course? I'm not sure how to understand this question, to be honest. But we can also follow up on that later outside of this. All right. A next topic that is also a bit related to upload limits is regarding the upload size. So right now, as mentioned before, an upload might be split across multiple requests. For example, because this origin doesn't or has a limit on the individual size of a request. So then the upload may get spread across multiple requests. But this introduces a problem because then the server only knows the entire length of the upload once the entire upload is completed, because then the last request includes the upload completed one header, indicating that the upload is done, and then the server knows the entire size of the upload. But this also means that the server cannot reject uploads early on if they are too large. It also means the server cannot optimize the upload storage depending on the size. So for example, smaller uploads get handled differently than big uploads. So we've been thinking about allowing the client to include an advisory header in the creation request. This advisory header would indicate how much data the client wants to upload in total across all upload requests, but the upload completeness state would still be entirely determined through the upload complete header. So here we have an example that shows this. We see a post request to /upload for creating a new upload resource. and the client includes the upload length 500 header field, indicating that it wants to upload in total 500 bytes. But the first request only includes 100 bytes, as seen by the content length header. The server then accepts this upload, and then the client follows up with the next patch request in containing the next 100 bytes. And then this would go on until the entire upload is finished. This allows the server to know the upload size up front and optimize accordingly. But the server may also reject uploads if they are too large. Of course, this introduces a bit of complex handling for the server because a client can indicate a different length than it would upload. But at the end of the day, servers already have to handle malformed clients that announce the wrong content length and upload more or less data. But in our case, we would also allow servers to reject uploads which have a different upload length than they actually do. All in all, I think there was a proposal a few years ago by Mark about like a new length header that indicates the message size independent of content length and chunk transfer encoding. This is a bit similar in that regard, as it's an advisory header for indicating the entire upload length. We think this is quite handy, but of course introduces a bit more complexity. So I wanted to ask if how you feel about this.
Hey, Marcus. I do think that this is likely to be useful. I also just point out so I also have a draft on versioning, which has a way of doing related. Also, you can do resumable uploads. And I just noticed that there is a place in that draft that also provides this feature. So it's really cool to notice it here, and I'll just probably want to follow up with you afterwards on it.
Piotr Sikora. Quick question. What about backward?
Marius, could you mute while they're speaking? I think there's some feedback coming through.
Of course.
What about backward compatibility with existing servers that don't recognize the upload length header? Because in this case, they would accept the content length header and assume it's completed, right?
This would only work if the client knows that the server accepts resumable uploads, yes. If you're uploading to an endpoint that does not, where you're not sure if they accept resumable uploads and you would want to do like transparently upgrading to resumable uploads, then you would have to include all of the data in your first request, yes. But it's a very good point. We should include that as a hint.
And I'll just say a reason why this is really helpful is I want to have a progress bar on the website to show how much of the file has been uploaded. And I'm going to generate that on the server. So I want the server to know how big the file is going to be. My name is Michael Tuman.
All right. Thank you very much for this input. This brings me to the last question. This is regarding integrity checks using the digest fields. We have added some guidelines on how resumable uploads interact with digest fields, which is just a recently published RFC. And here we can see an example where a client includes an integrity field when creating an upload. We see post/upload again, and then we also see the representation digest using SHA-256, meaning that when the upload is created, the client tells the server what the expected digest is. Once the upload is then complete, the server can check if the digest of the received data matches what the client told the server it should be. But this, of course, requires the client to know the digest up front or use trailers to send it in at the end. But trailers are not always available with every HTTP API client unlikely or unfortunately. And knowing the digest up front is also not always possible. For example, if you're streaming data from a video cam, for example. So we've been thinking about how this could be optimized, and the digest fields RFC also provides a way for the client to request a digest from the server. For example, or in this example here, we can see that the upload creates a new, or the client creates a new upload, but indicates to the server that it wants at the end the representation digest SHA-256. So it creates the upload resource, then the upload continues over multiple requests. And once all of this is done, we can see the server responds with a response that includes upload complete and then provides the representation digest back to the client. And then the client can calculate the digest while it's uploading the data. And at the end, it could then compare its digest that it has calculated over the entire upload with the digest that the server created as well, or calculated as well. This is pretty handy. It's a nice optimization. At the end, the client can then determine, okay, there was something wrong with the upload. I should not be using this upload anymore. But all of this is outside of this protocol. But this also brings the question to the HTTP working group, who also offered the digest fields RFC. Is this a sensible use of the integrity preference fields, or is this rather not a well-designed?
Sorry, Marius, we're just looking meaningfully at Lucas, and he's poker-faced right now.
Well, certainly I'd like to see his input, but my inclination is this seems like a sensible way of expressing it. There may be some questions about the naming, but see previous bike shed length. We can bike shed that as much as we want.
All right, I might then check with Lucas outside. Then we can have a look if this is done properly or improperly. All right, thank you. Then I will go to the last slide. Thank you all for the feedback. It was quite helpful. As I mentioned before, the draft is shaping up pretty well, or from our point as the editors. We hopefully wrap up these last questions pretty soon. And then we would like to do some more editorial improvements to the draft. It's a bit rough in its shape, has a lot of changes recently done, which doesn't make its structure easy to use. But we hope that after this, we can continue forward with this. I'm not sure if a last call is too eager already, so please bear with me here. But we feel that this is slowly coming to a finish, and then we can hopefully wrap this up. But of course, if you as a working group feel differently, then we'll adjust, of course. But yeah, that's all from my side. And if there's nothing else, then we can continue with the agenda. Thank you.
Any more questions, comments about this draft? Okay, thank you very much. Next up, we've got, I think, Julian? Oh, with query, yeah. Julian, did you have anything prepared, or do you just want to talk to the state of the draft?
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay. I've got no slides. Status is I actually managed to update the draft so we don't have something that has expired 2 years ago. After the lab, maybe Mark can pull up the issues list. After the last meeting, we had a brainstorming in a small design team trying to find a find consensus on how to derive a gettable resource for the query. And I think we are stuck with the question whether we want to use location or content location for that. I think there are good reasons for both. We only need one. And I'm currently don't know how to actually get out of this disagreement that we have mainly with Roy. So I guess that should be identifying query results, the third one. The second one.
The second one.
Yeah. And once we have solved that problem, we will have at least a straightforward way to cache the results of a query. Yeah, it's in the PR, not in the ticket, I think.
This is an issue.
Ah, it's that ticket, sorry. Yeah. So there is some disagreement whether location or content location is the better choice. And we somehow need to find a way out of that. And I guess most of the other open questions will follow from that. Most of the work for that pull request or on that ticket actually has been done by Mike. Maybe he wants to say, he already raised his hand. Okay.
Sorry, I'm waiting for both the buttons to click through. So I'm not looking at the spec in front of me right now, but I think basically what it comes down to is there are two possible things that we could communicate. We could say on the response to a query, where can you find in the future these same results again? So let's say I do a query. I think Roy's example was for weather. I do a query for weather in Vancouver. Am I going to get back a URL that says weather in Vancouver at 1:27 p.m. on July 22nd? Or am I going to get back a URL for weather in Vancouver right now? The definition of content location says that if you did a query to it at the time this message was generated, you would get this response, which is true either way because it's the moment that you're asking about. So should one of them be evergreen and one of them be historical? Should we only do one? I don't know. I think both are probably useful. Having an evergreen one that preserves the contents of the query for future use is interesting. Maybe for caching purposes, but that's a separate conversation. But I think right now we just need to figure out, we have content location, we have location. Are we using both of them? Which one is going to be which? I don't know that there is a right answer. I think we just need to come to an agreement and move on. So Mark, you might want to have your coin ready.
Yeah, I don't think that it's either or. I think we can document both patterns for use at the appropriate time. Much like the rest of HTTP, it's a toolbox and you use it in different ways to get different effects. But these don't necessarily conflict. I can imagine a response with both location and content location on it that makes perfect sense. I think we just need to document it clearly. And as Roy says, the semantics of content location are independent of the status code, whereas and the method, I think, yeah, the method, where except for a couple of weird exceptions. Whereas the semantics of location, we'll need to look into and make sure that that makes sense. But I think it can work, and I think we should do it.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, I'm warming to the same idea. I think the weather example is rather clarifying in this case. Location would tell you where you would go if you wanted to make the same query again. maybe under different conditions, like the world has moved on since you last made the last one, you may get a different answer. Whereas content location would be, if you want exactly the same bits again, content location is where you go for that. So I think having a clear explanation for both of them is the right answer here. Now that we've had this discussion, we have a lot more clarity about it. We just need to work through the wrinkles on location. But I think, as Roy says here, it is tied to the semantics of the request type, and so we can rely on that.
So it didn't occur to me that we could actually use both for different purposes, and I think that's something we can work with. Maybe Mike and I can make a proposal for that and then get Roy's feedback and then move on. So I think that would be a big step in actually making progress here.
Yeah. Just to add, I think the reason we're in a little bit of uncharted territory here is because, as it says, the type of relationship is defined by the combination of request method and status code semantics. And typically, we've relied on status code semantics to carry most of the weight and assumed get, or maybe post. But now we have a new method, and we're putting more weight on the method to define semantics. And so we need to think that through. And
yeah, and actually in one of the commands in the ticket, I asked if I wanted to do the same thing, for instance, for prop find, would the mechanism be the same? And if so, would I need to update the definition of prop find to say so? And I think that's what Roy was pointing at, that we can define that for each method. Of course, it would be good to define it consistently, but it's up to the definition of each method to specify that concretely.
But I do think we can rely, I mean, in the common case, if I send a query to a server and it creates a resource, I don't see how it's going to get away with not creating a resource for repeating that query in the future. And so the response status code is probably going to be a 201, and 201 is going to carry a lot of the weight here. So I do think we're going to be okay.
Martin? You're good.
So Julian, is there anything else? I think I agree that this is the big issue. Is there anything else we can do to help you?
No, not right now. When I looked at the tickets earlier today, I found your proposal from last year, whether we could define query as a transformation, or define a transformation from a query request to a GET request, which would be an interesting idea. So essentially define how the payloads combined with the content type of the payloads could be translated for certain content types to a query string for GET. But that would actually wipe out the possibility to have the query URI actually already have query parameters, because then they would there would be two things that we want to put into the query string. So I'm a bit skeptical that we can make that work.
I tend to agree.
Yeah. So I'll put that into that.
You do have Mike in queue. Just want to check.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
I was going to point out that the other issue that we kind of set to the side in that first conversation, as part of that PR with the content location, or now location, or both, we have put the same text for query that we have for post that says a cached post. So in RFC 9110, a cached post can be reused to satisfy a later GET or head request. So Roy was questioning that. We may want to separate that out, but if people have opinions on the reuse of query to then get that resource later and caching it, now's probably the time to talk about that as well. Personally, I agree with Roy that that is potentially dangerous, but also we set it for post, and there's no logical reason to me that this is different. It's risky, but it's risky for post too.
I'll raise my hand. I think the common case is going to be what we described already in the draft, where a query is cached and reused for another query.
So we probably should distinguish in the spec, for the sake of terminology, the query result resource being created and the resource for the query itself being created. One of which would be location and the other one content location.
Well, I think there's three things. There's the resource that you query, and the request body forms part of the cache key. And if you query again, then you can get it from cache. And then there's the resource and content location, which is just like any other gettable thing, right? And then there's the resource in location, which we haven't talked through, but I'm assuming is also a gettable resource. It's not a resource you send more queries to. It's a resource that's kind of static, re-expression of the query, right?
Yes, so as written right now, what's in, I guess, if we move it to location, it's a gettable thing to repeat your query without resending all your parameters.
Right, great. And I think that's a sensible thing to do.
And so then the question is a cache allowed to take the response to the query and reuse that for queries to that gettable resource? I say queries for get requests to that resource.
Which is the same question as for post, I guess.
Yes. So post allows it. I don't see a reason that query should be different from post, but I agree that it's kind of a tricky thing for a proxy to do correctly.
Well, nobody does it for post.
And I think that aligns. And I think that aligns with Roy's comment somewhere that maybe we shouldn't specify it right now, but observe what people try to implement and come back to that question later. But that's not a perfect solution, of course.
If it's cross origin, I'm scared. If it's same origin, I'm less scared.
I think based on the design team meeting last time, we specified, I think we specified how to be the same origin, but I'd need to double check that.
We certainly talked about that, putting in some text about that. Maybe we don't have it yet. So my proposal is that Mark and I tune that PR to address Roy's comments and define the behavior of both content location and then see what feedback we get.
Okay. And I think along the way that solves many of the outstanding issues.
Yeah.
I see Martin's in queue.
So this was something new. I noticed that Mike's doing a lot of work here and his name is not on the draft.
Yeah, I was going to say that right now, that we should add him.
Well, thank you.
The chairs will take that on board.
That's a simple change.
This sounds hopeful. It sounds like we're making some progress.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Do we want to? I mean, we've talked about it before and not followed through, but it sounds like maybe a design team meeting in a little while might help.
Yeah.
We can coordinate people's holidays and so forth.
Sure.
Anything else in this draft?
I think the other issues are not that hard to deal with once we cross that bridge. So I don't think we need to discuss them right now.
Okay. And I don't see anything in the room, so thank you, Julian. Good to see you.
Okay.
And next up, we have cache groups. So let's go to that real quick. So like Julian, I don't have slides. I did a revision. We had a couple of outstanding issues and I cleaned up some things. Probably the biggest change from the last draft is it doesn't contain the kind of speculative invalidation based upon we were doing it the other way, where it wasn't based on invalidation, it was based upon, what was it? If there's a relationship between different things and something expired, then we assumed everything else expired, I think it was. So I think this draft is ready to go. I don't have anything on the issues list right now. Have people had a chance to read it? Let's double check that actually. Yep, the issues list is still empty. Otherwise, I would ask for the active chair to open working group last call.
Any comments, thoughts? People think this is good to go for last call? Any thumbs up? No? Has anyone read it? Please read it. That's always a forcing function. It's last call, you see, read the document. Okay.
As always, we want to see not only, issues or whatever, but also support. Okay.
All right, we don't have David back.
Are there any implementations of this?
Not of this exact syntax, no. It's designed to be compatible with a number of deployed extensions that are very similar. They're just not standard.
Okay. Yeah, I know several of us have something similar, but I was curious if anyone has implemented or will be implementing this one.
I've talked to our cache team and there's interest, but it's a matter of priorities. And this may be one of those that has to sit out there for a little while before it gets a little momentum, I suspect.
Okay.
All right. You're doing very well on time. So the next thing on the agenda was David's presentation on a proposal for the HTTP wrap-up capsule. He is not in the room currently. I believe he may come back later. The next thing on the agenda was I was going to share some work that's happening in an int area that is relevant to the group. But I guess anything we want to bash in, or should we just jump to that for now?
Okay, great.
I can go up to the microphone. All right. Hello, everyone. Tommy Pauly speaking as a individual here who is working on a document in the int area that is relevant. I'm co-authoring this with Dragana from Microsoft. And this is all about how do we discover proxy configurations either from a network or once you already know about a particular proxy configuration. This applies to things that go beyond HTTP proxies, but most of the interesting ones are HTTP proxies. So it's relevant for here and a bit for Mask as well. I'm just going to try to give an overview of the document. You can also go and read it, but we'd like to hear any feedback that this group would have. The motivation here is mainly to discover the configuration and information about these modern proxy types. So we have Connect UDP and Connect IP from Mask. We have Connect TCP that we are finishing up in this working group and hopefully shipping out soon. you could imagine other flavors coming up. I think we have Ethernet coming down the pipe. So like new flavors of extended connect proxies. But these have URI templates. They don't have great ways to configure themselves in existing UI. So there's a gap for the configuration story. And one of the goals here is to have something, at least a mechanism that will work with existing very simplistic proxy configuration mechanisms, like putting a proxy name and port somewhere in a UI field or getting something from a pack file, or proxies can come from lots of places. We also want to have this be something that isn't relying on pack file formats or WPAD, stuff that isn't fully standard, has a lot of security concerns and edges for how you're parsing out JavaScript. And we'd like to have something a bit simpler, more straightforward, and more secure. So the protocol overall, it's leveraging another int area RFC that we had worked on before, something called provisioning domains, which is, for the purpose of this conversation, is a way to have like a HTTPS protected JSON file format that is associated with a way to reach a network. And that can be something that's provided by a router, but it can also be conceptually a VPN configuration or a proxy configuration. It's a way to reach a particular network, like you can think of it like a virtual interface or a tunnel. And so we have this JSON format that already exists at a well-known URI location. And so we're expanding the semantics of that to allow you to ask a proxy you already know about for its PVD configuration file, and then it could list you various things about the configuration it has for how it lets you reach other things on a network, including a list of other proxy protocols it supports. So this is a way to take an existing proxy you know about and upgrade it into doing connect TCP, connect UDP, etc. You can also ask other things about the configuration. That's why it's not just a list of other proxies. You can have the DNS information of like the domains that are relevant to this provisioning domain, and we could add other things in there. It's also possible to get this file from a network advertisement. And so while there are various security and privacy considerations for why you would trust a proxy that's been provided by the network, you could learn that configuration using this mechanism. So just some diagrams so we can visualize this. We have related proxy discovery where you say, I know about an HTTP connect proxy that was typed in somewhere, and I can reach out to it and ask what its URI templates are for other things. So I can do UDP proxying. Woohoo! I can get this file and it can tell me, oh, I apply to these DNS zones and I won't let you actually reach anything else. So if you're using it, now you know a priori that it's only going to be useful for a subset of things. And then you can also have a case where you have an in-network proxy that you're doing something funky on a cellular network and you need to use a proxy to reach their cellular service, and they can tell you, hey, here's the proxy configuration to use, and it supports mask and da 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 da. So various flavors that this can be used for. As an example, let's say I know about proxy.example.org because someone typed that into some UI, or I got it some other way, got it in some configuration file. I can create a request for the well-known PBD file, ask for the JSON, and if it supports this, then I get back that file, and it can say, here's my provisioning domain for this proxy, and it includes these other related proxies, and I can say, oh yes, it has yield HTTP connect, but it also does connect UDP, and it maybe can do connect TCP as well. We have adopted this in int area, just as kind of like it was originally the basic form where you just had this list of proxies. We've merged in a couple things recently, like adding in the ability to associate like ALPN hints, so that you could know a priori if this is something that if the proxy will support connectivity over H3 or H2, so you can get it right the first time. Clarifying how to do split DNS configs, so maybe you could also have exceptions. Kind of getting into what pack files let you do without trying to go all the way down that slippery slope. There are open issues around, should we have authentication parameters in here? And I'm not sure what to do there, but that's the state of things. So I'd love to hear people's comments, thoughts, suggestions. Please feel free to engage on the GitHub or do issues or on the interior list or the HTTP list.
Lucas Pardew. Could you go back one slide, please? You got there listed in like a protocol field with some value.
Yeah.
Where do those values come from? I was just curious. Are they the tokens we already register, like in somewhere, or are they new strings that reflect stuff that we do? And you would like, I was just curious.
Yeah, this is a great question. So originally, before it was adopted, we were just like, oh, we're going to put the URIs in and you're going to infer from the template what it is, and that's a bad idea. So the current state of this is it is its own registry of strings because there are things that exist in there like socks, like things that do not fall into the upgrade token format. So there's a set of things that are like, these are the legacy types or types that exist outside of HTTP. And then the other ones, it just says like, these should match the upgrade tokens being used for extended connect proxies. So they are exactly the same strings, but you kind of have to make sure they end up being the same. If there's a better solution to this, I would love to hear it.
I don't know. I don't want to like shed like here and now, but just looking at that slide, like both of those things are HTTP, so maybe using a HTTP prefix for anything that's HTTP based,
yeah,
could be useful.
Yeah.
To distinguish it from socks or whatever stuff. So.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, so you could even, I imagine, do a thing where you have like, HTTP extended connect UDP. So you indicate this is something that uses an upgrade token, and then you just slip the upgrade token inside there. That could be a very nice solution. Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions? Do you want to? You can get in queue on.
Is there anybody else in the queue, or am I good?
Please go ahead.
So yeah, this is a different slide deck than the one you have for Interia.
Sorry, can you identify yourself first?
Oh, sorry, I'm Josh Cohen.
Oh, hey. These are not the interior slides.
Okay, yeah.
This is a overview for
Got
people who have not seen this before in this group.
Great. So in terms of this, one of the things, if people have paid attention to the Interia list, which is what to do about WPAD, and so as part of that, you had mentioned like more specific or narrow discovery. Can you speak on how you would find these PBD files?
Right. So this is getting to the question of what do you do for network discovered proxies in general, and how this would be different from WPAD?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, well, it's really two parts. One is, so how do you, like for these files, these JSON files, how do you come to get them, to use them? And that sort of, there's a secondary question of, okay, like if part of that is network discovery, then how do those fit together? But that may be more elaborate than you want to talk about here. But just a general question, like how do you come to get these files?
Right. So there are two ways. The way that comes from a network that is defined in the PVD RFC is you have like an RA from the router that says, I'm defining a network provisioning domain. It has this essentially host name identifier. And there's a flag that says, I have an HTTPS file at a well-known URI off of this host name that you can fetch to get my config for other stuff that doesn't belong inside an RA. And so you can get it that way. That's an existing file you can fetch, and that could include a list of associated proxies. But since that was all bootstrapped just on having a particular host name, you can also say, hey, I know about an existing proxy host name. I'm going to try to fetch the well-known URI off of that thing and say, do you have other proxies? Like, do you have Connect UDP? Do you have these other protocols? And then you can learn more about it that way. Okay. So those are the two bootstrapping mechanisms. The document really focuses more on this format and what you do for kind of proxy to proxy discovery currently. Again, yeah, there are more concerns that would need to be worked out for when you use a proxy from the network. And I think, with WPAT, at least historically, it's like you get this from the network and you are expected to have browsers or whoever else respects this just like start using the proxy without kind of necessarily user interaction or like understanding like what's the trust relationship or security model, like that's the concerning area. Since in the PVD discovery model, this is new, it is an opportunity for a much more restricted use of this. So you could imagine cases where, I'm just throwing these things out, like either you are already aware of lists of proxies that you trust, and so if they want to say, yes, I would like you to use this thing because this is more optimal for me, and if you already are going to use a proxy, pick this one. Or cases where, like for an enterprise, let's say you already have some other enterprise provisioning on your device that says you trust this network and want to use this, but the PVD is used just as a way to dynamically tell you, by the way, this kind of enterprise configuration you were already going to use and you have set up and you had user permission to do, the details of the current URI template to use to get to Connect UDP is here. So it's more of a way to just add information in steering and not to apply proxies to people who otherwise would not be using a proxy.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anything else? Anything else? No? Yaroslav.
Okay. So, unfortunately, David says he can't make it back. So I think, unfortunately, that's our agenda for today. I don't think any other presentations are ready yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so it's great that we have something that is going to make pack files go away. One common use case for pack files is not define proxies for certain destinations, but to define some exceptions. So certain things that should go direct and certain things that would go into the proxy. Maybe I didn't read draft carefully enough, but I don't think at the moment it allows that. You can define proxies for certain suffixes, but you cannot say those things should go direct instead. So you don't have that negation.
It was added actually in the very last revision that was done on the draft submission deadline, I believe. So we refactored kind of the split DNS config to be able to have exception domains. So you could say, do it for all of these domains or everything, but don't do it for this list of subdomains. So you could carve things out that way.
Thank you.
And if there are other things that you see that would be useful to kind of bring over without expanding to the full syntax of a pack file, that'd be great. Yeah. I'd also be curious to hear if people in this room have any thoughts about like the authentication angle, if it's appropriate to put that type of thing into this configuration, or you just rely on normal HTTP authentication challenges that you would receive from a proxy.
Any other comments, feedback? Mike. Oh.
So to the question about authentication, mostly I would think regular prompts would be okay, except that this is almost exactly the scenario that the unprompted auth was intended for. So I think you do need some kind of indication if you're supposed to be using unprompted auth with these endpoints.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, the other thing is, this is quite similar to a lot of the more like proprietary configuration files we've used on our platforms for doing things like the private relay proxies or enterprise relay proxies. And those can come along with like, hey, use this privacy pass key or use this client cert authentication as a hint. Those make sense in cases where you get like, here's a profile configuration from your enterprise, and they tell you here's your client cert to use with this proxy, and that works. That type of case doesn't seem to apply to a generic thing you discover out of the blue, but potentially some of the cases like, hey, I'm going to prompt you for this privacy pass token from this issuer. If you want to go prefetch a bunch of these, that would behoove you.
Yeah, telling you what credential you should expect to present is reasonable. Embedding the credential probably doesn't matter for that case.
Right, but it's more like something about the type of credential that is supported by this, and that could potentially influence the selection of proxies that are used by a client.
Okay.
We're done very early.
We're done very early. So you get an hour back. Enjoy. And we'll see everyone on Wednesday again.
Thank you for note taking.
Thank you. And thank you again, Martin Seaman, for note taking. Yes, definitely. How did you get away with not using Yang? Because I don't hate myself. I mean, because they had that configuration format for clients, and I'm like, oh, thank God they hadn't seen this. Yeah. 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 Okay. Gets all that. Yeah. You want to file an issue for that? Simple things like that. Yeah.